Without any further ado, let me introduce a woman who's a former United States Senate candidate from Delaware, the Republican nominee in 2008, running against then six-term Senator Joe Biden. She's been dubbed the Tea Party darling, leader of the Second American Revolution by the foreign press, and, of course, has been everywhere. Now written a book called Troublemaker. Let's do what it takes to make America great again. Christine O'Donnell with us on the Common Sense Club. Christine, how are you?
Thank you so much for having me this morning, Scott. I'm doing well.
Great to have you. You know, I was just telling the audience that what motivates me every day to get behind the chrome microphone of Common Sense and talk to folks all across the United States now with our nationally syndicated program, but for years here in the heartland of America, North and South Dakota and Minnesota, is the kind of sentiment, the kind of kitchen table common sense that we see coming from the Tea Party movement. And, you talk a little bit about in your book about how, try as they might, the establishment elites will never have the last word on liberty. There's something in our national DNA that gets our backs up, leaves us shouting at our would-be masters, "You're not the boss of us. Make no mistake, there are more of us than there are of them." They call us wacky. They call us wingnuts. We call us we the people. And, of course, the name-calling continues even since the book, terrorists now and racist and everything else. But I am, day in and day out, inspired by the fact there's Christine O'Donnell's out there and others in the Tea Party movement that are playing an important part in our national debate, and it is inspiring. So I appreciate your leadership in this effort.
Well, thank you, Scott. And without folks like you and your listeners, there would be no movement. We're giving voice to what so many foot soldiers are doing on the ground, going out in their communities, talking to their neighbors, bringing these issues to the forefront. And that's part of the reason why I wrote this book. You talked about if that's what keeps you inspired. We all know the saying, the only thing necessary for evil to prevail is for good men and women to do nothing. But so many of us find ourselves tired or exhausted as we're in those crossroads that not just our country's in, but our movement is in. And we cannot take the bait when people like Biden call us terrorists or Maxine Waters says to go to hell. And the other day, Hoffa said, take care of them or get rid of them or whatever, take them out. Okay, when you hear Hoffa and take them out, there's something implied there, and I think they very well knew that. But we cannot take the bait and react to that stuff like the angry extremists they're trying to accuse us of being. Otherwise, they've won. They've won by bullying us back onto the sidelines and changing who we are. And I'm hoping that by not only laying out what I hope to be a convincing argument for why government should remain small and local, why we should return to the Constitution, and why socialism is absolutely wrong, not just from an economic policy, but if you care about the little guy, you have to absolutely reject socialism. But I wrote my story as well, and I tried to be candid and honest about mistakes I've made, about growing up with an alcoholic father, because so many of us in this middle-class movement that you just talked about, Scott, think that, we can be behind the scenes, but we could never put our name on the lines, or, we can't get involved. And I've even had people say, I'm not the type to vote, I didn't go to college, or whatever their wrong mindset is. It really is a lack of confidence. And I'm hoping to, by letting maybe relate to some of the financial struggles I've been through, some of the mistakes I've made. I want the reader to see that it's not about if you've ever fallen or not about if you've ever made mistakes. It's about if you get back up again. And, so far the reviews that we've gotten from those who have read it, it's done just that, and that's one of the best compliments I could ever get.
The title is Troublemaker, and you're not giving that label to yourself, but Time Magazine dubbed you that because of the infamous 2010 campaign as a troublemaker. Yet that's a prime example of what you subject yourself to when you're out there talking about common sense, constitutional principles, and quote-unquote Tea Party. Or, you get the labels. Do you think that the reason Time Magazine calls you troublemaker, that we're called terrorists or racists or everything else, is because of the effectiveness of the movement? I mean, they're threatened by the movement, therefore they need to discredit it any way they can. Isn't that what's going on?
Absolutely. And what we have to keep in mind is exactly what I said in the book. There are more of us than there are of them. So the few, the high-powered vocal people who have access to the media are trying to put this stereotype out there. And that title, Troublemaker, yeah, Time might have meant it as an insult. I took it as a compliment because they gave it to me for the way that I busted up the backroom deals, challenged the obnoxious sense of entitlement that so many in the establishment have. Who is she to think that she can run for office? It's not her turn. It's not my turn. I mean, that's actually what they said. Okay, if the people voted for me and rallied behind me and asked me to run, you know, the lords of the backroom only have control. And what I'm hoping to do is to inspire more troublemakers to get out there, because there's so many of us who have a discontent with the way that career politicians have turned Congress into favor factories, but yet we are blamed for the so-called paralysis in Washington rather than cheered and championed for bringing common sense ideas to the debate in the debt ceiling, and rather than let these career politicians recklessly raise it, risking all of future generations' financial strength in America, we're demanding that some stopgap measures be put in place. So we've got to continue to remain motivated, take titles like troublemakers as compliments, wear them as badges of honors. As a matter of fact, I've heard people all across the country who are starting troublemaker clubs, you know, and they call this group of ladies in Utah, another one in Florida, call themselves the Troublemakers. So again, you know, whatever they throw at us, let's take it as a badge of honor and forge ahead. Our country is at stake.
You know, you talk about the lords of the backroom. There's many in the Tea Party movement that blame, the establishment, if you will, and the fact that there was not enough Republican support. You expect Time Magazine's criticism and the left and everything else, but the establishment, if you will, was threatened by your candidacy as well. And they say, hey, what happened to Christine O'Donnell is a prime example of why the Republicans didn't ultimately take control of the Senate. We have to take a break, but when we come back, I want to have you think about this a little bit. How much of your loss in the 2010 race do you put at the hands of the Republican establishment, and how much of it do you put at just sort of campaign strategy to say, if I had to do it over again, here's what I would do? Let's talk about that when we come back. By the way, Christine O'Donnell is our guest. The book is Troublemaker. Let's do what it takes to make America great again. We'll ask her, too, what she thinks of the community activist in chief. That's what she refers to President Obama as well, and talk about some of the things in the news right now, too, on the economy and the run-up to the 2012 election. As we continue on the Common Sense Club, I'm Scott Hinton. More after this. Don't go away. Back with more of the Common Sense Club and the Scott Hinton Show. The book is Troublemaker. Let's do what it takes to make America great again. Christine O'Donnell joining us today on the program, former U.S. Senate candidate from Delaware. So let's talk about the campaign, which is how you really became nationally known and a Tea Party darling of sorts, and given all those wonderful labels that you have been given for leading the Second American Revolution. As you look back on the 2010 campaign, how much of it was about the establishment and breaking China that prevented you from a victory in Delaware, and how much was just campaign X's and O's that just unfold the way they do, and sort of now, in retrospect, hindsight being 2020, looking back and say I would have done a lot different?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Well, first of all, I want to explain to your listeners, as I do in the book, before the primary, I was ahead in the polls against my Democratic opponent. So before I was even the Republican nomination or nominee, I was beating Chris Coons and had a 2-to-1 margin in the polls among the independents. So I had a 2-to-1 advantage, and in Delaware there are almost as many independents as there are as there are Republicans. So that was a significant lead, and then the Republican infighting started. And in my book, I define the establishment not as plaguing just one ideology and not even just plaguing the political movement. The establishment, as I try to define it, is a mindset. And you don't have to be an incumbent, and not every incumbent, not every established person has this mindset. And likewise, not every, this mindset plagues people who are still trying to make it. It's an eagerness, yes, an eagerness to compromise and step on people in order to get ahead for your own selfish gain. That's how I define the establishment. And my race, when we started to gain momentum, we threatened the establishment, which meant bringing in everyday Americans who are accountable to their neighbors, not their own, special interests and not the fellow lords of the back room. And we started to challenge the whole political establishment in Delaware. And what happened then was my own Republican Party then filed these false complaints against me, false criminal charges against me, all of which have been dismissed. But back when all of this was heating up, the headlines read that I'm being investigated for these criminal charges all during the election. So we beat them, and then what happened right after, all of that exploded, we had only about 5.5 weeks, here in Delaware when the primary is so late, mid-September, and then the general election is November 2nd. In those 5.5 weeks, we needed to do one of two things. We needed a united Republican Party. We needed to do what happened, the strength of what happened in Kentucky. If you remember, Rand Paul was horrible. The establishment Republicans said how, if this guy, wins the election, it's all over for us. He's such a Tea Party extremist. He won the primary. He became the Republican nominee. Mitch McConnell, one of his greatest critics, was standing arm in arm with him on the platform saying, Rand is the greatest thing since sliced bread. Let's take him to Election Day. And they stood united, and he won. We either needed the strength that came from a united party or more time to rebuild this whole grassroots network that they have, that they were still using. Castle's folks were telling people to vote for my Democratic opponent after I became the Republican nominee. So that wasn't happening. We couldn't get more time. And then, which brings me to, what I think is the perfect storm, one of our own self-inflicted wounds. When all that didn't seem to happen, as I describe in the book, I went trying to give the National Republican Senatorial Committee the investor confidence they needed to get behind my race, even if not with money, but with the echo chamber, going on the talk shows saying what Mitch McConnell said about Rand. We were wrong about her in the primary. She's great now. She's great on the issues. She beat the establishment. She can win. That could have changed a lot of the damage that my own party did, but instead they joined the Democrats in maligning, because when you don't have a record to stand on, you resort to the politics of personal destruction. So we responded with that stupid ad, and it didn't even take me hindsight to call it the stupid ad. I called it the stupid ad during the campaign, as I talk about in the book. I never wanted to cut it, but I cut it. It got leaked, and ultimately I approved it. It went on air. It was my mistake. But the reason why I share it like that, and I try to share it in the context of when good leaders know to, first of all, surround yourself by good advisors. But the mark of a great leader is when you know to ignore the advice of your advisors and go with what your gut is screaming to tell you to do. That was not my moment. I ignored my gut. I went with that stupid ad, but I share it the way that I do so that so many of us in this movement, Scott, so many of your listeners might learn as we go into 2012 to listen to your gut. As we watch what's going on in D.C., our common sense barometer jumps up and says, that's not right. Listen to your gut. React to your gut. Your gut got you this far in life, and you're probably more successful than you're allowing yourself to believe. So again, I'm hoping that people can relate to my mistakes and not let your own mistakes hold you down, but realize it's the past. I'm mature enough to own up to them. I'm strong enough to make it right, and I'm moving forward because our country is worth it.
How many of the candidates on the national scene in the presidential mix right now do you see as in a Christine O'Donnell vein of being out there to challenge the establishment and ultimately bring this country back to common sense conservative principles and make America great again? I'm going to throw out some examples. Michelle Bachmann's in the mix right now, obviously in the presidential race. Is she
She's certainly a troublemaker.
Yeah, is she in the troublemaker vein?
Bachmann is certainly a troublemaker, and I tip my hat to her. I tip my hat to any woman who runs on either side of the aisle, because just as you can see from Michelle Bachmann, she faces much more scrutiny. I mean, you would never hear anybody ask Barack Obama, hey, when you get into the Oval Office, are you going to be able to control that libido of yours? You're a young, strapping man. But yet they can say to Michelle Bachmann, hey, are your migraines going to be an issue if you get to the Oval Office? There's such a double standard. But she is speaking the truth, and she's getting more scrutiny. Yes, she's made a lot of gaffes. However, so has Biden. So has Obama. As a matter of fact, at troublemakerbook.com /chapter notes, we have a whole list of some of Obama's whoppers and, all the gaffes that Biden has done, all the mistakes that they've made, the misinformation they've put out there.
All ignored by folks like Time Magazine that call you a troublemaker, of course, so no question about that. Our time is short. Sarah Palin, some suggesting after the Iowa Tea Party incident that you were originally scheduled to speak to, and now that there's a rift between you and Sarah Palin, is there?
A riff. I think that was supposed to be her event. I wasn't the only one who was getting attention, who was dropped from the stage. I think that it was just to, again, you'd have to ask her camp, but my take of the whole thing is, it was just supposed to be her event, and like I said, I wasn't the only one who was getting attention who got nixed from the speaking lineup.
How are you doing for time? Do you have 10 more minutes to stay with us and finish the conversation? Okay, let's keep this conversation going. I'm enjoying it. Troublemaker is the book. Let's do what it takes to make America great again. Christine O'Donnell, the author. We'll continue with more after this break on the Common Sense Club and the Scott Hannon Show. Don't go away. Back on the Common Sense Club. It's the Scott Hannon Show. The book is Troublemaker. Let's do what it takes to make America great again. Christine O'Donnell with us on the Common Sense Club and the Scott Hannon Show, former United States Senate candidate from Delaware and now author. And by the way, we did link at ScottHannon.com, the troublemakerbook.com link that we just talked about with all of the gaffes, if you will, that seem to only make their way into the media when they're Republican gaffes. But those of the president, the vice president, other leading Democrats don't get there. So we were just talking about that before the break, and we have it there as well. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things currently in the news. The president today, I think 3 national polls, is at an all-time low in his standing. Hits new lows. Democratic pollster now saying he's no longer favored to win re-election. Of course, I have a quote-unquote job speech. I don't know how many times I've seen this movie, but yet another speech where there's a great deal of expectations over what he's going to give, but seems to be in pretty tough shape right now. Do you see this as an awakening? Do you see this as sort of as Republicans, Independents, Democrats all agreeing, coming together that this guy's not fit for office, Christine?
I think a lot of people are waking up. What he's done has taken all of our economy, everything about America, with all the bank takeovers, everything that he's done. It's just such a radical departure from what true freedom is all about. And that job speech he's going to make, it's like you said, you've seen that movie. It's just a remake of the original. It's not going to work. So far, a lot of what he's talking about, the same failed Keynesian fantasies. But I will be interested in seeing what he has to say. If he does put any of the tried and true economic principles that work into his plan in order to try to have, a little bit of recovery in the last year that he could try to campaign on. But here's the thing, Scott. He is so vulnerable right now, and yet I'm still not confident we can win. Now, I think that our 3 front runners, Bachmann, Perry, and Romney, all have a great shot at beating him. The reason why I'm not so convinced just yet is because of what's happening within our own party. We have establishment turning on their own, and again, that's why when we started this conversation, I was talking about how we can't take the bait and become the angry extremists that they're accusing us of being. We can't become ineffective the way that they're accusing us of being. We've got to forge ahead and make sure that anyone but Barack Obama, anyone but Obama, is serving in 2012. And we've got to unite in order to do that. I've already publicly extended the olive branch to Karl Rove, but he continues to trash me, to trash the book, because in the book I put all the juicy gossip in there, not necessarily to be gossip, but, the readers will be pleased. All those little details are in there. But I do so to state a case that the establishment has got to recognize that we, the people, this middle-class movement, this grassroots groundswell, we're not going away. And we stand on the truth. We stand on the principles that made this country great and will make our country great once again. And I'm hoping that by laying out the case, that was all they did to beat us down. It didn't work. We're going ahead and we're going stronger, that they might swallow their pride, turn around, extend a hand to us, and once we unite, that's what will make sure Barack Obama is a one-term president. But it's a big if. And right now, they're saying in order for that to happen, we have to compromise. But as I lay out at the end of the book, freedom is inscribed on everyone's heart. In our desire to have our work appreciated, and our longing to be loved for who we are, in the great reward that we feel when we've earned something, and when we can pass those earnings on to make a better life for our future, for our children. That is how freedom is inscribed on everyone's heart. That's how God created us, to crave freedom and liberty. Only in a free market economy, only where there is truly free enterprise can that freedom be exercised and the American dream achieved. We've got to get back to that. So I try to remind the reader in Troublemaker that if our message isn't resonating with people, like Karl Rove will say, this Tea Party is too extremist or they're too principled, as my own Republican candidate said against me, all she's got are her principles. If we can be proud that those principles are what will make this country great again, and we can forge ahead, and remember, the truth is on our side. When our message isn't resonating with people, you don't abandon the truth. You reframe the message so that it resonates with what is already in their heart. It's there and they're craving it. We just have to get better at speaking it, at talking it, and I'm hoping that the Karl Rove types will stop bashing the Tea Party, stop bashing me. Again, like I said, they're trying very hard to make sure people don't read what I write in the book, because then they're going to be inspired to keep going and to make sure that everybody knows we can do this with or without Karl Rove, and that's what I'm hoping to get accomplished by 2012 through this book.
Well, our listeners were incensed about some of the back and forth going on, and Carl's a regular guest in this program. He's a friend of mine, wrote the foreword for my book, and talked quite, supportively of the Tea Party movement. In fact, I can read a little excerpt about it because I think it was pretty profound. But in Carl's, when I pressed him specifically on some of his comments about your campaign, his defense was, "Look, I'm paid to be an analyst. I'm asked a question about the campaign, and I'm going to speak honestly." So he put it more on the campaign and things that he was ultimately asked, rather than a personal disdain for you. But let me just read you something he said about the actual Tea Party movement in the foreword for my book and get your response to it. He said, it's my sense, and Scott said, most in the Tea Party don't want to become simply a GOP auxiliary. Instead, they want to be part of a movement of persuasion, one that educates Americans about the fiscal challenges we face and then holds politicians in both parties accountable. They want the Tea Party to be like the civil rights, pro-life, and Second Amendment rights movements that have had such a powerful impact on public opinion in our nation. The Tea Party movement is changing our country politically, economically, and culturally. In the 2010 election, for example, the Tea Party helped draw to the polls a higher percentage of the voter-eligible population than any other midterm contest since 1982. Helped move a huge swath of independent voters into the GOP column. Independents voted for Republican candidates by a 59 to 38% margin. So anyway, he goes on to talk a lot about the success of the Tea Party movement and put more of your loss specifically to things that happened in Delaware and the establishment there. Is that wrong?
No, everything he said about the Tea Party movement is absolutely right, and we just hope that he will be consistent on it, because recently he said some things that counter that, and he's trying to get a more moderate candidate out there. He's raising money because he doesn't like any of the candidates that are out there right now, whereas if he would get behind those candidates who have emerged, I think that we will have a lot more strength going into 2012. But specifically, Scott, regarding my campaign, the night I won the primary, he continued to spout the misinformation about like I said, my own party filed a false claim against me, a very harmful campaign, a very harmful legal campaign, again, that has been dismissed. The FEC tossed it out. The U.S. Attorney tossed out their false complaints. But Karl Rove continued all through the election and even after Election Day to continue to say these false things, that I didn't pay my taxes, which is not true. I did pay my taxes, and I sent him all of the information.
Was that yeah, and we're up against another break. Are you still okay for time? We'll finish this off.
I think so. I think I have a couple. Yeah, this is good, of course.
It's too fun. I want to finish on Karl Rove and then give you a chance to talk about what's next for Christine O'Donnell when we come back on the Common Sense Club and the Scott Innes Show. Don't go away, folks. All right, back on the Common Sense Club and the Scott Innes Show. Troublemaker is the book. Christine O'Donnell, our guest, had a fascinating conversation with her today about this great new book. We've linked, by the way, to troublemakerbook.com for more of the facts, but encourage you to pick up the book published by St. Martin's Press. All right, last question on Karl Rove, then we're going to talk about the future. So what you talked about and all the misinformation and the I would call it, I guess, Delaware Republican Party dysfunction. Does more of the blame of those attacks coming from supposedly our side lay at their feet, or the national Republican establishment, which I guess you would put it at Karl Rove's feet? I mean, really, these stories were emanating out of Delaware, weren't they? I mean, this was Delaware party politics that was obviously a bit dysfunctional.
Yeah, absolutely, Delaware party politics. The whole Delaware political establishment is dysfunctional. Most of Mike Castle, my Republican opponent, most of his staff is now working for the Democrat senators here in Delaware. So, yes, a lot of it has to do with that my campaign was leading a grassroots movement that upset both sides of the aisle on the political establishment. But Karl Rove came to Delaware in 2009, December 2009, when the mere rumblings of my campaign were just starting, when it was just buzz that I was about to announce a primary campaign. He came and he met with all of the Tea Party folks, and I talk about these back, behind-the-scenes meetings that he had in my book. And then he publicly said at a Delaware GOP fundraiser, whoever the winner of the primary is, we've got to put our differences aside, no matter what side of the aisle you're on right now, and get behind that winner and make sure that that winner wins. Now, when it came to my race, when I won the primary, the night of the primary, he's on television slamming me on Sean Hannity's show. Then he continues to go on the national television circuit, all the way up to the Friday after Election Day, where we were both on the Today Show. He's still on national television telling the Today Show audience that I didn't pay my taxes, even though we gave him all of the documentation before the primary and after the primary. So he knew it wasn't true, but for whatever reason, he continued to go out there and, quite frankly, borderline libel and slander my character and my name. What I have publicly said since then, we've got to put all that behind us. And he and I need to unite. He's got to stop trashing me, stop trashing others in the Tea Party, stop saying that the Tea Party is part of paralysis. I absolutely love what he said in the opening of your book. That is beautiful and that is right on, and he needs to continue to credit this Tea Party movement and all that we're sacrificing for being the ones to bring about real hope and change in this country, because what we're doing is demanding that our leaders get back to the principles of the Constitution, the principles, the only hope in which a strong future for the country lies.
Well, we'll do our part to make sure that there is a unity there amongst the conservative side, and Karl's own words to the Delaware Republican Party faithful ultimately come to fruition. Does this mean, since you want this mea culpa of sorts and to sort of come together and put all the past behind and let's look forward? Does that mean there's another race in your future in Delaware?
I'm not sure, but let me just say real quick one more thing on Karl Rove, Scott. If you talk to him, please remind him I've extended the olive branch, and we need to go forward without. So that anytime it ever comes up again, we both can honestly say we've talked, it's all behind us. But regarding another race, perhaps I honestly don't know. As I, write in the book, in my previous runs, I originally first said no until I, finally said yes. So I've learned that I shouldn't just flat out say no. But it depends on what's happening. If I run, it'll probably be in 2014. But what I'm doing right now is we started Christine PAC, and as I mentioned, not just the Delaware GOP, but the ultra-liberal George Soros-financed group called CREW also filed a false claim with the U.S. Attorney's Office with me that led to a whole FBI investigation. All of it was based on one perjured affidavit, and the U.S. Attorney, even though he's an Obama appointee, he saw the case for the nonsense as it is, and it got thrown out before it even made it past the first initial investigation. So what we're doing right now is we are filing our own series of counter complaints against George Soros's group CREW, because as many know, he's a billionaire who is unashamed about his socialist agenda, and he's up front with his agenda to turn America into a socialist country. So by filing false claims against good candidates like me, CREW is also the group that went after Sarah Palin. They went after dozens of other good conservative candidates and groups. They filed a false claim against Sean Hannity. Now, everyone has won because they're false claims. But this business of filing these false claims, it's not only an abuse of the justice system, it's the politics of personal destruction, where then these headlines read that all these good people are being investigated, and it helps to discredit our movement and make it seem like we're a bunch of crooks. So we're fighting back. I started Christine PAC, PAC, in order to file complaints, our own complaints, with both the U.S. Attorney's Office and our local state attorney general, who happens to be Joe Biden's son, Beau Biden. We've also asked our state attorney general to file criminal charges against CREW, because what they did was absolutely wrong, Scott. None of your listeners could have a beef against their neighbor, and because they're ticked off, go to the police and say, hey, they robbed my house. If you do that, the police will be obligated to investigate. You filed a complaint with the authorities. They can't just ignore you if you're claiming it's absolutely true, and especially if you're filing an affidavit to say that it's true. They have to investigate. Once they investigate and find out that you wasted all these government resources and that there was no truth there and it was simply a vendetta, you will then face consequences from them. But for some reason, CREW has never had to face the consequences of abusing the justice system as a political weapon and knowingly filing false claims. So we've just filed our counter complaints, and we're going to continue to do that. So that's on the top priority list right now. And not just because I'm ticked off that they did it to me, but by the mere fact of us fighting back, the next time someone tries to do that, file a false complaint against a good political opponent just because you don't have a record you can stand on, they're going to think twice. So it's time to fight back so that we stop the politics of personal destruction for future candidates.
Good for you. I want to give you a chance to quickly respond, because we have about a minute left, to what we now have in the way of leaks of what the president will unveil tomorrow. Two of the biggest measures in his proposals expected to be a one-year extension of a payroll tax cut for workers, nothing new there. An extension of expiring jobless benefits, nothing new there. That's about $170 billion in quote-unquote cost. Also, there's some talk of a tax credit for businesses that hire the unemployed, $30 billion. Public works projects, school construction, spending of $50 billion in cuts, and about $300 million, they say, in total that he's going to unveil. Is that, in the 10 seconds we have left, any kind of a game changer or more of the same?
No, It's more the same. It's Frankenomics, and I mean Frankenstein economics. He's taking, extending the jobless benefits, because that's what the Democrats want, extending payroll tax cuts.
Yeah, more and more exactly right. Christine O'Donnell, what a fabulous book, what a fabulous conversation. The book's Troublemaker.